Banditos, your favorite bandits of the dollar bins are back for another Wednesday episode on this September 28th. I am Joe Marcello.
I'm Warren Phillips.
I'm Mike Farah.
And this is the Dollar Bin Bandits podcast. And I hate to say it, but September is just flying by and the weather is starting to cool off. But why not hunker down and let us warm you up with a little comic book chat? And what better way to do that with one of our fantastic interviews with comic book inker Randy Emberlin. Now, Randy's career spans 30 years. He's inked titles like Star Wars, Star Trek, Spider-Man, and one of our favorites, G.I. Joe.
Yeah, I got to talk to Randy a little bit at Terrificon. It was so nice to see him in person, but boy, he had a line waiting for him. He, Mark Bagley, and John Romita Jr., it was just person after person. People had all sorts of things they wanted him to sign. And it's a credit to him how his work has really touched fans for so many years.
I couldn't make this one, so I'm kind of jealous of you guys talking to Randy. Seems like a great guy. I remember him primarily as an inker over Erik Larsen first, and then Mark Bagley in Amazing Spider-Man. And that was just the period where I think all of us were really in the pocket collecting comics, especially for me, Spider-Man. And so, you know, he was kind of always seeing his signature with those two pencilers. It was great to see. And so many amazing issues, especially around Venom and Carnage too. Two big characters that were coming into their own at that point. So without further ado, let's get to it. It's Randy Emberlin.
How do you like to be, what's your preference in terms of being introduced as, like, inker, artist?
I think inker artist is good. I mean, artist is important because I was an animator for over 10 years before I got into comics. And, you know, animators have to draw and know an awful lot. So, you know, one of the reasons I became an inker, really one of the only reasons, because I wanted to be a penciler, is that I lived in Portland, Oregon. And, you know, my friend, Chris Warner, who I grew up with from first grade, I mean, we were drawing Batman in first grade, you know, it's like, and he got a job at Marvel. And it was because of his portfolio, showed at San Diego. But he had worked with me at book companies and we did all kinds of other junk, you know, he was managing record stores. And finally he gets this break and he moves there. And they said, if you save enough money to, you know, be here for 3 months to come into the office, you'll have regular work. And he got it. And it was Alien Legion. And my animation stuff here in Portland was not going well. I mean, I love my partners. It was a partnership with two, they were amazing. But business-wise, we should have been in LA. You know, I mean, we had the talent, our stuff was great. We won awards and we still weren't making a living, you know? So it was just like, so I begged him. I was just like, what can I do to get into Marvel? I mean, it's like, and he goes, well, send me some pencils, send me this. And he goes, you know what? I'll send you some of my pencils because I'm going to be doing backup stories. And why don't you practice inking on my stuff? And then you do it with vellum over the top of the, they send you a Xerox copy. That's Marvel way. And even Chris, it was easier. And then you do this thing. It's so ancient. I don't even know if they do it anymore. Probably not, but because you got computers. But it was, you thin out your rubber cement. So it's really liquidy. And then you put it on both surfaces, on the copy and on this heavyweight vellum. And then you wait for it to dry. And then you carefully, you know, marry the two together. And then you ink on the vellum because you can see the pencils underneath. And then when you're done, you use a rubber cement. What do they call them? It removes rubber cement. It's like an eraser. You have to go through and then you clean it off and you mount it and you send it back to them. It's a ton of work. I think I did 3 pages. And so I had stuff in and I put everything I could into those pages. I experimented. I did all, you know, like I was into Bill Sienkiewicz then. I was like, wow, this guy's a commercial artist and he's doing comics. How is that possible? You know? So I was using a toothbrush and spraying stuff on the armor of Alien Legion guys and doing all kinds of effects. And anyway, Chris liked it. And apparently Carl Potts liked it. And so it kind of got shelved, but it was like, you know, Randy's out there. And then of course there's always as with Marvel or anyone, there's always a problem. There's always a deadline, right? And somebody's screwing up. Well, in this case, it was 2 guys. And so the 2 people that were having problems on Alien Legion inking the book, hadn't even finished half the book, was Scott Williams and Will Spertasio. And we all know where they ended up. So I think it's pretty great. And it's a real feather in Carl's cap. I just saw him at with Fan Expo in Denver, and we sat next to each other, and it was great to talk. But he has discovered so many people, including Jim Lee. I mean, it's like Carl is the guy. You know, he was an artist for continuity with Neil Adams, and he started telling me those stories between 75 and 80, and all I could do is just sit there and go, more, you know, just open. I mean, it was great. So having an artist editor made all the difference. And so he gave me a chance, and he says, Randy, you know, it's like, of course he denies this. And when I told him, he goes, Randy, he goes, we have 7 pages and they got to get done, you know, this week, or we're going to miss that deadline. Can you do it? This is your, you know, big chance. And I go, yes. Of course I'd said yes, no matter what, you know, even though I've only done 3 pages. So they come in the box comes in FedEx. And that's what made it possible for me to stay in Portland and work out of my home. Was, you know, FedEx started in like 82 or something, and this was 85. And so it comes in the mail, and there's 11 pages in there. It's like, it's like 7 is a terrible amount. 11 in a week, and it's the first thing I've ever done. I mean, most guys could do a page a day, you know, and they're, you know, and if you're a good inker, 1.5 pages a day. And I guess so I could do 2 pages a day, but it's just like, you know, it was in pain. I stayed up all night. I can't even tell you how many nights. I was so exhausted. And when you know, I'm telling the story, I might as well tell the whole thing. When I finished the box, it was like, I think they were picking it up on a Friday or a Saturday. And the guy comes to the door, the FedEx guy, to pick it up. And my wife goes to the door, and I have been up all night, and I'm erasing the last page. I'm literally cleaning it off, you know, and getting it ready. And no time to make Xeroxes, which you're supposed to do in case it gets lost. And the guy goes, you know, he comes to the door, and she goes, could you come in and would you like to have a cup of coffee? My husband's not quite done yet with it. It's like, you know, and then the rest is history. It's like I got a handwritten on like, you know, lined notebook paper that, Randy, you got the job. You're the regular anchor on Alien Legion, because Chris wanted me anyway. So that was, and I framed it, you know, it was like, it's kind of like your first dollar or something. Mm-hmm. You know, I've got, you know, it's up there on the wall. And I told Carl about it, you know, a few weeks ago, and he's like, I don't remember that. He goes, who was my assistant editor at that time? You know, sending you 11 pages, you know, it's like, I wouldn't have done that. Like, well, I wouldn't have turned it down no matter what, you know, I was going to get my chance. So that made it possible to get into comics. And once I was in, I didn't, you know, don't make any mistakes, make all your deadlines, start studying everybody's work. And I think being an inker was probably the most, it was the best thing that I could have done, because you get to work with so many people. And because he was a good editor that was an artist, he gave me people that were good artists. I mean, I've been stuck with some horrible artists at Marvel that I could draw circles around, you know, and it's like, you got to do so much work. That is just horrible. That makes not fun. When they give you great artists and the pressure's on, it makes you rise to that level, and you actually become better. And that's how you learn. You look at it and you go, oh my God, look at those textures, how he's handling the background, how he's handling the shadows, what's going on with the facial structure and the planes. It's like, I learned so much in the first 7 years. I was actually glad that I wasn't penciling, even though I got a chance to pencil at Dark Horse. They wanted me to do that to help start the company. And that's another story that happened right away. I mean, I just hit all the right buttons, I guess. I mean, it's like I was, you know, bouncing. I was doing work for First Comics and Marvel, and then helping start Dark Horse. And it was just all that in like 85, 86, 87, you know. And then Marvel, when I got on Spider-Man in end of 88, beginning of 89. So that was then. I was on the gravy train then, baby. And Erik Larsen was a friend from up in Bellingham, and he used to come down to the Comic Cons in Portland because they didn't really have much going on. There was no big cons up in Seattle, and he would come hang out at our booth, like Chris Warner and I, or you know, whatever. And he'd go, I can draw. Let me show you. It's like, I can do sketches too. It's like. Turns out we were really nice to him. Don't be mean to anybody, because you never know who might give you a hand on the way up, buddy. So yeah, he requested me as the inker because he knew I was doing Crow Quill stuff, and I'd done all that stuff on Chris Warner, and that was just the biggest boost ever. You know, I mean, it was changed everything. You know, being on Amazing Spider-Man, that's the flagship book. You know, so it's like Batman over at DC. It's like having Batman.
So one thing you talked about, you worked with so many different artists, and which is what the incredible thing about being an inker, like you said. Who are some that you really feel like your style and their pencils just mesh together so well?
You know, I did pretty well. I used to take stock of that. You know, it's like, how many people have I pleased? You know, how many have I been successful with, because there were a lot of different styles. And I figured probably in the range of I was probably about 85% successful with just about everybody that I worked with, because as a penciler myself, I could look at it and understand and grasp it, and then have a phone call or two and go, what about, what do we want to do here? And then I could do it, because I had the technical facility from doing animation and hand inking, and but I was learning new stuff all the time. So there are people I love to work with. I mean, Chris was great because he and I grew up together, and I understand we like all the same kind of stuff, and we liked all the certain inkers and styles. But Chris Warren was great, but Larry Stroman was actually a really good connection on Alien Legion, because he was kind of a commercial artist at the time. I can't remember if he'd worked at Continuity or not, but he, another guy that Carl found. So he gave me room to do more finishing work, so I could actually, do things, experiment with things. And Carl was good. He'd go for it, because Larry would leave lots of holes in space, and he would, it looked like he was light boxing off heads, from photographs, and then going in and changing them into characters. And I would just I was looking at all this abstract like Bill Sienkiewicz and Klaus Janson backgrounds, and it's like, this is a chance to get the flathead brush out, and this is a chance to do this kind of drawing, and so I get to put a ton of stuff into Larry's work. And I actually got complimented by Neil Adams, so I thought that was really cool. He came over to my table at San Diego, and he picked up the stack of the Alien Legion stuff with Larry and me, and he goes, this is great stuff. This is just really brilliant. So what you're doing, it's and because of that, I don't know if it was him saying it, but I got a whole bunch of offers from DC because of that. And that's not even it's like an epic book. Does anybody read those? It's never great. It was a great book, great art, and it was a great, nice package, but the circulation, wasn't anything great. So whatever. But
I was just saying.
But there's other people too. I mean, I could probably list a ton of other people. I mean, I liked working with Mark Bright on G.I. Joe. The guy can draw, whereas a lot of those G.I. Joe artists couldn't draw. They could just draw toys and vehicles or whatever, but he could draw, and he knew how to tell a story. And I don't know what happened to him. I've tried to get in touch with him, and we have other things in common. I'm a musician, and so is he. But who else? There was a bunch of really great artists that I worked with. Gosh, I go through the Doctor Strange stuff, and there were people that Carl would put in for 1 or 2 issues. Terry Shoemaker's great, and I got to ink. I don't think I ever got to ink. Oh gosh, the guy who did the covers that I love so much. I can't even think of his name right now. He's incredible. But I got to ink Gene Colan on I chose to do those things. It's like I want to ink some of the old guys, and that was on one of those strange horror books that they were doing, and then in Marvel Comics Presents, I got to ink Don Heck before these guys passed away, and I wanted to ink Steve Ditko because he's a big influence, but never got to. But Erik Larsen did. But there was a bunch of other guys too. It's funny, I can't think of some of these. I mean, some of them are British artists. Oh, of course, I forgot. Probably the best artist that I ever inked. I worked with him. I actually chose him at Dark Horse to do Ghost for them. It's one of their books, and that's it's pronounced Ivan Reis, but it's Ivan Rice.
Oh,
yeah. That's the he's the big shot. He started out doing this Superman. He did the Green Lantern stuff, and then Brightest Day, and then it was Superboy or Superman, and now he's doing Batman stuff. But he is a monster. I mean, and even back then he was young, and he has a real interesting backstory. But Terry, who was it? Randy Stradley was the editor, and we're friends from way back in college. And he goes, "Well, here's the Cam Petty book." It's like the guy the agent, that creepy agent guy that represented him, that ripped him off basically, half the time. And he goes, here are all the artists. He goes, "Randy, who do you want to work with?" And so I went, because they had a few other guys that I worked with. It was after Terry Dodson, who would have been great. I mean, I would love to have worked with Terry, and he's a friend. But no, he was too busy. Anyway, going through and I looked at it, and it really was a kind of Jim Lee clone work when you looked at it, Ivan's work. But you could see that it was already changing, and he was so good at it, that there was drawing underneath that you could see the underdrawing was there. And man, I'm telling you, as soon as he got on the book, he started looking at Terry Dodson and Adam Hughes, and his drawing changed. and it just evolved, and it was amazing. By the time we quit Ghost, he was ready, and I got us a couple of jobs at Marvel, and I was begging them to sign him to a contract through my editor. Of course, you never know if that gets through, but they didn't do anything. In fact, they took away. I was supposed to ink him on a Vision miniseries, and I didn't get to after I'd done Quicksilver and Avengers and some other stuff with him, and then after that, DC snatched him up and they signed him to a big contract, and that was the end of that. And so Marvel lost out. They're really dumb, But he's by far the greatest artist I think I've worked with, and he calls me his second best inker because the guy in his studio is the first best inker. That's who he uses. But he goes, if I get in trouble, he goes, I call you.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Ivan, because I love his work as a lot of like the whole work he did on Green Lantern.
That's
huge
fantastic.
Fan of.
Oh, I know.
Huge fan of.
Green Lantern was kind of dying, on the vine, and it's like you brought in somebody like that.
Him and Jeff Johns' work on that was just fantastic. So
I know it really changed things. I mean, when you got people of that caliber, they were smart. I mean, they hung on to him because he's game changer. I mean, they got a lot of good people at DC, and things have kind of evened out over the years. The writers and artists go back and forth and everything. I mean, Marvel had the upper hand for years just because they had the unique quality of characters and writing and the styles and the dynamics, and then it sort of eventually washes over into everybody else, and you get all kinds of stuff now.
It's like I've noticed it's really it ebbs and flows like anything else. They catch a stride and they really just ride it out, and sometimes they just too much so. For a long time it was X-Men, X this, X everything.
I know.
At Marvel. And then with DC now it seems like it's just an overabundance of Batman.
Right.
And if not Batman, then Superman. If not Superman, then Wonder Woman. So it's cyclical, and now we're getting bombarded by Avenger stuff.
Well, of course, it's like, anything that has to do with movies and TV or whatever. I mean, Disney, at least, I mean, they're pretty smart about. They bought Marvel to use the characters, the iconic characters, to make gajillions of dollars, but they let them do their own thing with the movies, and they were brilliant. They put it together like a universe the way they should. But even now with Disney Plus, I got it. I mean, it's like, because they're going to be able to do stuff, short little things. Let's do a mini series of just 5 episodes, and we don't have to do it again. And it's fun to see that kind of stuff, and it's quality. I mean, it's actually pretty good. Maybe the writing isn't always good, but whatever. It's still fun to see.
There is
question here. Why the Batman movie, the new Batman movie? Why do we do that movie? It's just I mean, it's completely separate from everything. It's just a Batman crime movie, I guess. I don't know. I mean,
thank you.
There was nothing about it that connected to anything in the past. I mean, to me, the Christopher Nolan movies are completely in a league by themselves. There's nothing going to touch those, but this guy was wimpy looking. He looked like some goth guy. He was, it's like he didn't have the physique. He was like, it's like there wasn't any backstory and the guy who played, Alfred was just like, it was just, I'm sorry. It was at least a good crime. Yeah, there was a whodunit, and figure it out. And there was a mystery and all that crap at the end. It's like, whatever.
You don't have to apologize for anything.
Okay. The case, sir.
The thing is, I just think what I think is they don't have any stories to tell, because there are a million Batman stories to tell. Why don't they tell them? It's just, Spider-Man too. It's like the Spider-Man stuff too. It's like, no. I think they were going, the pendulum is swinging too far the other way. Yeah. They like go dark. Now we're too dark. Like it's like, there has to be some, between, the way I see it, between Bruce Wayne and Batman, there's got to be a difference between the two. Bruce Wayne, somewhat lighthearted, plays an idiot sometimes, aloof to what's going on. Right?
Yeah, playboy. And forgive my speech here, but he was an asshole. He just flat out says, screw you, Alfred. He comes out of a coma. What you lied to me. Yeah. I'm like, all right, so this is how we're doing this.
I know. Well, it had great visuals, so I'll give it that.
Yeah.
You know, as an artist, I look at it, I go, wow, it's some really great dark, you know, and he's got the wings and flies down. There's some great action scenes and stuff like that. And there is a good sense of, you know, the story's like a crime drama. It's too long as usual. All of these freaking movies are too long. I mean, the Spider-Man movie, the latest one, everybody like talking about how great it is, you know, with all the different Spider-Man in it. 2.5 hours of that. At an hour and a half, I'm ready to turn it off. I was just like, oh, really? You know, it's like, where is this going? I don't see where this, and you know, I mean, and even the Venom and Carnage movies, you know, I'm not going to give those great grades either. You know, they're okay. I mean, it's like, you know, humorous, but you know, I don't know. Movies are too long for the most part. They, you know, they just, let's just, you know, here's a good idea. Let's do this special effect and we'll have another fight scene. Okay. All right, good.
Even as much as I love the Thor movies, it's another one that's going a little too, you know, they went a little bit silly and joking, you know, in the
With
last
Ragnarok.
one. Now this one is going, this
I
one's just
haven't
a little
seen it yet.
too much.
I loved Ragnarok though. I have to admit.
Loved it.
I
Absolutely
loved it
loved
because it had that Marvel, you know, laugh at yourself humor that Stan Lee would have had. And I just thought, all right, well, they finally did one, you know, it's like, so I haven't seen the new one. I'd like to see it. I'm sure I'll laugh at some of the stuff.
Oh, definitely. It was fun.
All right.
But,
yeah, that's cool. All right. Anyway, back on, I got us off track, I'm sure.
No, it's fine. That's why we're here.
Okay.
One thing you worked on that Joe and I grew up on is G.I. Joe. We were huge fans.
The last interviewers were huge fans.
But it just, you know, growing up, it was to us the coolest comic books, the greatest show, the best toys.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get that assignment, and what was that experience like?
I'll tell you. I mean, maybe I should change my story about that. Make it really good. No, I was struggling. You know, I mean, I wasn't struggling, but I was, you know, trying to get into Marvel to get my insurance. Sounds terrible. Try to get on the insurance plan for my family, you know, and it's like, well, like I was on. Let's see, what was I doing? I mean, I think I'd quit Alien Legion because I had to really. And I was doing Doctor Strange. See, Doctor Strange and Alien Legion were both bi-monthlies. So they're only 6 issues a year. So I had to have 2 of them to make a living of any kind. And Carl Potts, the guy, nicest prince of a guy, he gave me a big raise and he wrote a letter so that the bank, so we could take it to our bank to get the loan for buying a house, to say that I had a contract with Marvel Comics and 12 issues makes a year. So he could say that, you know, he's kind of, you know, pushing it a little bit, but still he did that for me. And I'll never forget, you know, I mean, it's so great. I mean, once he got into the housing market and I was probably like, you know, married, I'd been married about 5 years. And here we had a house, you know, and it's like, and then the rates, you know, we sold our house and got twice for it than what we paid. And all of that is so important. And it's because of what he did to help us get it. So anyway, but what was I saying? I was talking about the G.I. Joe, and I was probably doing Doctor Strange and doing some stuff for First and for Dark Horse. And I can't remember the editor. Oh, I know it was. I did some fill-in issues of like an X-Men book, like X Factor or something, at least 1 or 2. And the editor who was on that book was also the editor on G.I. Joe, or, you know, and it was like, they go, well, the G.I. Joe is changing. You know, it's like the team is changing and this guy's going to be, and we really need an inker. And in fact, he goes, we need a finisher, because they knew I could draw and stuff. And, you know, and they said, would you like that? And I'm like, it's a monthly book. I'm not excited about doing a toy book. It's a lot of work, okay? You know, but it's a monthly book, and it's, even though it's a licensed book, it's still inside the Marvel, you know, it's not the universe, but it's inside that Marvel financial, whatever it is. You got a monthly book that gets royalties and all that, you know, even though it's licensed. So I said, yeah. And the first issue, they weren't happy with me because I didn't do enough work on finishing. And the guy had sent me just like really a lot of stuff with big holes, and I probably put in blacks here and there, and I outlined it. I didn't realize how much work I was supposed to do. So I said, no, send it back to me, because we had time. And I said, I'll do a bunch of other stuff. And I did. And then they were happy. And then, you know, I think it was Bobby Chase was the assistant editor. And it's funny because at that time it was Bob Harris who became the X-Men editor, he was editing that book, and he'd seen my other work on stuff, and and it was like, it was almost as soon as I got that job, and then Bobby became the editor. She was great, and I got this call from Bob Harris, who not a lot of people like Bob Harris anymore. But anyway, it's like he goes, Randy, he goes, I have the power. I have the power. And it was like, I have the X-Men books. I am now the king, It was like Dr. Doom phone call, It was just like, wow, okay, well then, all right. Well, so then I had the book, and she was great as an editor. And I had, my pencilers weren't great to start with. I mean, they're okay. Ron Wagner's, he's like a Kubert school guy. He was pretty good. And then it kind of, it went up and down until Mark Bright got in the book. And when Mark got on the book, it was like, God, this is actually fun to ink. I mean, he was into the toys. He liked drawing the toys. He could do it. He could draw people. He had his own action style. He'd done like Green Lantern stuff over at DC, and anyway, and he and I hit it off, and we're both, he's like a bass player, I'm a guitar player. So it's like, anyway, we had a great time, even though it was a lot of work. And I did hire a couple of assistants, because then I got Spider-Man, and I didn't give up G.I. Joe. And I'll tell you why. It's like, you guys go, oh, this is the greatest book and everything. It's like, I had no idea. I mean, I have all the G.I. Joe toys. I still have the figures from like the 60s, that I bought. I mean, they're not in mint condition, but I've got all of that G.I. Joe stuff. So I was, we watched the animated cartoon, which was on at that time. It was like in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And I remember the first issue I did was the space shuttle. It was like 65, issue 65. And my son is, I can't remember what year, he was probably about 7 or 6 or 7. And we were watching it together. And at the end of the episode that week, it was like, buy the Marvel comic at the end. And the comic spins around and comes up, boom, on front of the screen. And there it is, the space shuttle toy. And every time that they did that on TV, the sales went up like 100,000. And it's like, we 9 months later, back in those days, you get a royalty check. So we didn't know. My wife's like, yeah, you gotta pay, we need this. We gotta have extra money. And I'm getting assistance so I can do Spider-Man and that, because I can't screw up Spider-Man, It's like, I'm trying to do a really good job in both books. And they were just like, ruling lines and erasing and, doing whiteout for me. But the first royalty check came, it was like $2,500 from G.I. Joe. And then somebody told me, that book isn't selling that far, or when you're on it, when you got on it, it's not selling that far behind the X-Men books, It's like, really? So it's a really good thing that you stayed on that book. So then, once you get one of those, that means you've already got 9 checks coming, because you waited 9 months, and then you just kept doing it. And I did that book for over 5 years. And it was a great book. It tapered off at the end, but it always produced. And because of that and Spider-Man, I made a really good living for about 6 or 7 years, and then before everything crashed and everything, it was, probably from, I don't know, 88 to 96 or something.
Well, I wanted to ask you, something I find very interesting and admire about your career is the long runs you've had on, certain comics, because, like Amazing Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, G.I. Joe, as you mentioned, Alien Legion, Ghost. You don't have many people who tend to, certainly not nowadays, who are on, specific titles for a long period of time. They'll do a few issues, move here, a few issues here. And, I'm sure there's always reasons for that. But what kept you doing these specific titles?
It's a great question. I mean, it's a question I love people to ask, because I'm from that school, even though I wasn't doing comics back in the day, but I'm from the school of like Jack Kirby and Joe Sinnott were a team for 100 and whatever it was, 300, I don't know what the record was on Fantastic Four. They didn't do all of them. That's true. But they were a team for years, 5 years, 6 years. And that was the case on a lot of books. I mean, they had teams, and from what editors said and people like Carl and other artists, they go, it takes a year for the inker and the penciler to do this, unless they've been working together before on other stuff. And, but I mean, it takes a year. So then you just get better and better, and each other's needs and how to fix others, stuff and improve it. And I'd say, like I said, about 85% of the people I worked with were extremely happy with what I did. you know, because I listened to them and tried to do, you know, I'm not a tracer at all because, you know, unless the guy wants me to do it, you know, but because I'm an artist and, you know, it's like I want to bring something to it. And that's what good inkers are supposed to do. They're supposed to improve it, embellish it. So the long runs for me were important. I mean, financially, they're important because, you know, you want to actually have something with royalties. In those days, you had to last almost a year. Also, insurance. If you were on a monthly book for a year, you continued to qualify for the insurance. So there's, you know, there were, what do they call it, incentives to stay on a book and to do that. So those were some of them. But, you know, I like the idea of being able to have a team, an art team and go. Now, granted, I didn't have that with everybody, but, you know, Erik Larsen and I had only a year together and we would love to have done more. And, you know, it's like, I mean, there was an invitation somewhere in there, you know, for me to go over to Image, but it was like, I couldn't gamble on that because I had a family, kids, house, you know, and it's like, I'm on Amazing Spider-Man and I'm going over there to do, you know, what? I mean, I don't even know any of the books they're doing. And it made sense what they did for them because they knew that they were popular enough that they could sell books. And, you know, for that short window, they all became millionaires, you know, it's like, so anyway, but I didn't do that. I stayed where I was. And I thought longevity is important. And in the end, longevity on Spider-Man, I think I've done 100 issues. If you add everything up, it's like, you know, it was like 5.5 years on Amazing, and then another year and a half on Web before it was canceled. So I think it was like 65 issues on Amazing, and another, anyway, it was like 85 or something, another 20. And then there was all of the other stuff like, you know, Spider-Man Unlimited and annuals and all of that stuff. And it ended up close to about 100. And so that's a good, I mean, I was trying for that. I was trying, you know, there were things I was, you know, like, I want to have this backlog, you know, this, you know, my history. I want to at least have a chunk of something that's a flagship book like Amazing Spider-Man. And, you know, Alien Legion was over 3 years. And Ghost, when I went to Dark Horse with Ivan, that was 3 years, you know? So I don't think I did anything less. I mean, the Doctor Strange was 3.5 years because even though it went to Strange Tales and then back to Doctor Strange, I stayed through the second incarnation when it was up to issue, start over with 1 and went to 3. So I don't think they were all like over 3 years of the stuff that I worked on. So I can say I have, you know, chunks of about 4 or 5 books that I actually did time on, you know, and actually put down some stuff. So it's good. I mean, I look back at it and I go, that's a pretty good career. It's like over 4,000 pages, I think.
That's pretty.
Like that. And a lot of guys are way past me on that, but I just figured that's good enough for me. You know?
Was that of your own choice though? Like you decided I'm going to stick with this, and then, you know, when the time came, okay, I'm going to move on to that, but I'm going to stick with that for a while, or?
You mean as far as books?
Yes.
I was careful. Yeah, I didn't want to burn bridges. I had saw too many people burning bridges, and, you know, God bless my friends, some of my artist friends I won't name, but they, you know, left too soon, and they should have stayed where they were because things were going to get better. And then when they went to the greener pastures at DC, everything fell apart, or, you know, they got canned, or, you know, something was canceled, or it's like, if you're in that good spot, you know who it was? It was like Larry Hama gave great advice. That's what it was. That's one of the, and he told that to Chris Warner too, when we were both, it was like, he goes, you never get off a book until they fire you. He goes, stay on the book until you're fired. He goes, you stay on that book. It's like, okay, all right, Larry. And, you know, I had to leave some books just because I physically can't do 3 books, you know, I just couldn't. So, you know, I wanted to keep Carl, my friend. So it was like, all right, Carl, this is my dilemma. I love Alien Legion. I like doing your book, but I have Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, and it's paying huge, and I love it, you know, and it's like, I really need to give up something. So I, you know, and I'll keep Doctor Strange. So I did that deal with him. I kept Doctor Strange, gave up Alien, and then I last, you know, and for quite a while on that. And then eventually I just kept G.I. Joe and Spider-Man, but I was trying to keep them, a couple of them, you know, at a time. And also you're trying to make a living. And my wife is going, you know, it's like, she was a teacher, but she had to take time off when we had kids. So she took her sabbatical, you know, almost 10 years, which was great. You get the kids raised, you know, before, but, you know, you got to be doing a couple of books a month to make a living. And if granted, if you're getting royalties that are great, which I did, I mean, you know, who knew that the comics were going to sell like they did in the 90s? And, I had, I don't know, 5 years of 6-figure income, which is unheard of, like back. I mean, a lot of those guys did well back then, but I did some of it the hard way. I think I did my first 6-figure year just on sheer quantity of books. I was working on 3 different books or something, and there's a lot of inkers that are, faster than I am, and they can even do more than that. And that was their goal. But, then you start losing your artistic thing. It's like you want to do it because you like it, not because you're just cranking it out, So I was trying not to crank it out. I was trying to still do something decent, and make progress. But if I am honest, I'd say the first 7 years, was just the most formative, and educational. It was my apprenticeship and probably the most exciting, of all of that kind of stuff. So
that's very interesting. I want to jump to your time on Spider-Man and Carnage.
Okay.
You're kind enough to show us some of your artwork before we technically started, which was
yes, here it is.
Awesome. And there it is.
This
officially.
Is the most iconic piece. And for years, I mean, I have a picture with Stan Lee from San Diego in 1993 or something like that with this picture. And then when I saw him it was at Calgary at that big, it's like over 100,000 people. It's a big expo up there. And I said to the guy, I said, can you get time with Stan for me? Can you knock out a space for me? And they did. It was so cool. It's like they walked me up to the front of the line and blocked it off. There's security, and it's like, and I got to go in, and I had the picture from 20 some years ago with him and this, and I took this along, and he goes, let's take another picture with that together. And then he started asking me about my family and stuff. And, I don't know how he remembered. I mean, I used to go talk to him in the aisles at San Diego. He was approachable. And I go, Stan, all those comics and stories. And, I know that all the great artists that helped, but I said all the morals that you had and the based on literature and all of the stuff. I said, it made such an impact on me. I'm so thankful. I got through just gushing this one time, and he's just standing there and he goes, I wondered who was supporting me all those years. Typical Stan, it's like whatever. But so that's the most iconic. And then of course, this is the rejected cover to Amazing 361, which is first appearance of Carnage. And like I told you before, the original, I just actually kept it at home after I'd inked it because they said, no, we're going to move on. We're doing something else. And of course, it looks more like this, only instead of Venom, it's Carnage, obviously. If this is a reboot that Bagley and I did, and that's kind of a cool thing. But anyway, so we did that. And I did not send that cover in for a couple of weeks. And I thought, I want to get my $180. So I did a voucher and I sent it in. And that was before we knew that the sales were like through the roof. It's like they had to go to 3 printings and all of that kind of stuff. So This cover disappeared mysteriously from the Marvel offices, and I never got back the original black and white. And it floated around for 20 some odd years, never heard anything about it. I'm sure it was being sold back and forth and stuff. But Marvel contacted me because we did summer camps for kids, comic book art camps. And we had DC would send us a pallet of 36 boxes, and Archie would send us all this stuff. And who else was it? Dark Horse, of course, huge because they're in Portland here, and I know them. And I just couldn't break through at Marvel to who was in charge. They just didn't have anybody. It was weird. And finally, I got this thing where they go, "Oh, Randy, we know that you have a copy. Do you have a high resolution copy of that cover? Because we want to use it for a Marvel gem, and we're going to color it and reprint it and all this stuff, or actually print it. It never had been printed. It was unpublished." So I said, "Yeah." I said, and they were going to pay me. And I said, "I don't want money for it. I want you to support my camps with comps. Send me comic books, any swag that you've got." And, I've got 150 kids over 3 weeks that could really use that. And I do a Marvel Day, where we draw all Marvel characters and stuff. So they did. And that was like in 2018, I think, something like that. And so then that cover finally made it out. It was published, it was colored differently than I did, but I've had this forever, it's like, anyway, but and so you've seen just about everything. Here's something more recent. This is like based on kind of the movie poster from the 3rd Spider-Man movie. Instead of the black costume, it's his costume and in the rain with lightning bolts. And it started out as a black and white commission piece for somebody. And I thought, let's color that.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's a fun thing to do. So
how did Carnage, the character, come about? And I guess more importantly, as it pertains to you, the look and feel of the character.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was actually, there were a lot of people involved in it. It was not just like, oh, Bagley thought of it, or, so it's, I mean, even Danny Fingeroth had a say in it, because the character initially, I think if you look, even at, maybe it's at this one, it is kind of in the one that's rejected here. If you look at it, Carnage, the black stuff is coming from the center of him. Mm-hmm. And he thought that looked too much like an exit wound. So if you started it there, didn't like that. So that was part of his input. I wasn't in on the meetings that Bagley had with Michelini that much. I'd hear it through Mark. And so, but one of the things that I remember that was an influence at the time, it's funny, I talked to Mark about it last time I saw him, and he's like, forgot. And it was like, how do you forget the Terminator movie with the T2 movie with Arnold? It's the T1000 with the liquid, spikes.
Yeah.
That's the inspiration right there.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it was at that same time. Look at the movie came out in 92 or whatever it was. Was this 92? 91? Anyway, it was right about that time, So anyway, we're all, influenced by movies and stuff. That's, sure.
Do you think maybe the character was overused at all?
Well,
I know,
sure it was later.
Well, because, like many of the characters, they become super popular.
Right.
Like I mentioned, X-Men, oversaturation of Wolverine.
500 X-Men books, yeah.
Right. And I think, at least as a collector and a reader, you see that.
Right.
I think you're starting to see it again now with Venom coming, being brought back numerous times and expanding on his mythos and whatnot. But do you think maybe that was happening with Carnage as well? Because it seemed like for a while there, Spider-Man, Venom, Carnage, and Siren. The third,
I know she came in. By that time, I was starting to lose interest in that, and what was happening with it, But interestingly, I didn't really like that. The 4-book format of round robin, I thought that was really creepy. I know it's a money-making thing. It's like Marvel goes, okay, we're going to run this story. Now, with Maximum Carnage, do it once. That's fine, but don't do it to the point where people are like, oh, I got to buy 4 books in order to just read the story. I got to buy them all, and right. It's like, and they kind of are doing, they did that later with some of these big epic, connecting, like in Secret Invasion and, whatever, it's like, they've had all kinds of stuff. But I think it gets to be overdone. I'm glad they did Maximum Carnage because that book, every time they reprint it, can be royalty checked. I mean, the things like this.
It's a serious.
And I did a lot of that, and you get a percentage of that. So, and it's been reprinted forever. So that one is a milestone, and I'm glad that they did. And also the 361, 2, and 3. I call it the trifecta. Like 3. Those are great, and they've repackaged those. I mean, let's face it, they've repackaged the stuff that I've done, everything over and over, even Doctor Strange. And I mean, I couldn't believe it. I did some Iron Man, Captain America annual and stuff that was repackaged. And it was like, oh my gosh, I'm getting stuff in the mail going, I don't even remember doing that. But you get a royalty, you get a reprint royalty, which isn't as great or anything, but it's great. I mean, it is great to get something like that. So I'm thankful for that. It's good. But I agree. I mean, I think what bugged me the most about it is the whole symbiote thing is out of control. It's just like Planet of the Symbiotes. And it's just like all of the symbiote this and symbiote that. And now we're going to have a female Carnage. And now we're going to do this with Carnage. Yeah. I mean, it's like, stop, like let something be unique. But they're just like, like we can just mine some more gold here. It's like, but I don't know.
Yeah.
And that was a problem. Obviously, when Marvel started doing all of those gimmick covers and starting stuff over with #1, and part of that was pressure put on them by the corporate people, because you had to keep making more money every quarter. Right? So that was a nightmare. Have you guys read that book by Sean? Is it Sean Howe? Marvel Comics: The Untold Story.
I haven't seen it.
You should read that. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a thick one, but I'm sure there's a trade, paperback of some kind out. I read it when it first came out, and it's been years. I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, but it's fabulous. I mean, he even called me later because he wanted to do something on Frank Miller, and he wanted to interview me or get information that I had from a apazine with Frank. I used to belong to an apazine that Frank was in, and a bunch of us that are artists now Anyway, point is, he researched it. He interviewed 1 million people, and people that are dead now. And if you read it, you get it. It starts with Stan Lee coming out of high school and going to work for his uncle Weaver. What's his name? Or is it Martin? I can't remember. Yeah, Martin Goodman. Is that? I can't remember now. It's funny. Anyway, that whole thing starts there, and it's just this, odyssey, and it takes you up to about, I don't know, 2013. So the movies had already hit, and all of the movie planning and all of that stuff. So it's really good. So anybody should read that. I mean, if they're interested in comics, kind of.
That's the Marvel Comics The Untold Story by Sean Howe, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I'm making notes as you're
saying. If I had it, I want to read it for you. I didn't bring that one upstairs.
Yeah, no, I got it here. It's in my cart.
Okay.
I want to jump back a few years because, as you mentioned before, you were part of the beginnings of Dark Horse.
Yeah.
When this books were starting, what were you guys trying to do to separate yourselves from other independent books that were on the market?
Okay. Mike was, he's kind of a genius. I mean, he's one of those guys that's like, he's 6'9" and, handsome. And, he played basketball for Portland State University. And he's an athlete, he's all these things. And he got a degree in graphic design. And he just thinks that whatever he decides he can do, he's going to do it. And it's going to be great. And sure enough, his company was worth $250 million. I could be off. It maybe be more than that. But he just made the deal about a year. I think it was about a year ago with a investor from China or somebody. So they bought 48 or 49%. So he still has a controlling interest, but he sold off, a big chunk of it. And so a lot of my friends that were editors got, not a lot of them, a few got some golden parachutes, and they're, like me, they're retired now. So that's good. Still hoping for my friend Chris Warner to retire soon. So he's still working there. But yeah, like you said in the beginning, what were they like? They were looking for the creator-owned thing. Creator, I had a T-shirt on that. It was like, I can't remember what was the slogan. It was creator-owned, creator empowered, or driven, or something like that. But they were looking for people to bring ideas. And initially, the book Dark Horse Presents was an anthology book that was supposed to have new stuff from people all the time. And I think they did a pretty good job keeping it black and white. And it was so hard to make. Color books didn't sell enough. A lot of times you had to sell, I think, 18,000 to break even, something like that. I might be wrong, but with a black and white book, just a few thousand, and you're making money. And so the first thing was Boris the Bear. And so it was before I even knew Mike. He already had that relationship with Jim Smith. Jim Smith turned out to be one of my assistants. And it's like he's just helping me ink stuff, and running around and driving places. And that's a sad story because it was between him and the Ninja Turtles, and it was like they wanted to do the animated series of Boris Bear first. They came and asked first to Dark Horse, and they couldn't get the deal done, and it was people couldn't agree on stuff or whatever, and they went over to Eastman and Laird, and we know the history of that. We know how that turned out, but nevertheless, Dark Horse did great. And, without that, and they did when they launched Dark Horse Presents, he asked me and Chris Warner and Paul Chadwick, who did Concrete, and Ron Randall, who does Trekker, and we're all sort of local. Washington, Oregon people. And he said, you guys want to do your own characters? We're launching this book. And there's where it all started, with people who had characters. I wrote the story, did the drawing. I had Randy do the dialogue, Randy Stradley, the editor, because we knew each other. And other than that, those first 4 issues are all local artists that made it in comics and helped launch that concept. And so they started off with that. And eventually, Mike his whole thing was he wanted to make movies. So he went to LA and they set up an office, a studio there, because they got I don't know how he did it, but he got the contract, a license contract from Fox for the right of first refusal on all of their properties. especially, they had to do with fantasy or science fiction or whatever. So that's how they got Aliens and Predator and Terminator and, a lot of other things. So they had that Fox thing. And then, of course, Star Wars, which was its own thing. You had to bid on that back in the day. I'm kind of getting blasted here by the sun. You had to bid on it back in the day. And they did a really good job with Star Wars. And I wanted to do Star Wars, so I hung out there. It's like, I want to do Batman and I want to do Star Wars as part of my resume. And I did. Because of Mark Bright, I was able to get in and do Batman, and also Paul Gulacy. And we did several issues of Batman. And then I did that big Star Wars project, the Crimson Empire 2. And that was like a series of books. And it became, eventually a huge hardback, which sold, all of it really sold well. But
which
that,
I'm sure we'll see on TV or movies at some point or another.
Yeah, it's a great story, and I don't know. Anyway, point is that, Dark Horse was smart in that they had those franchise. And even with Lucasfilm, I used to hear all the stories from Randy. They'd go down there to the ranch and it was all cool and everything. And then they'd have meetings, but they said it was really tough dealing with them. I mean, they're very, they had exactly what they wanted to do and this and that. And Mike said when they lost it to Marvel because of Disney buying both Lucasfilm and Marvel, and then they, when the contract was up and there was no chance of getting it, because I think they had it for like 28 years or something like that. And it was just, he goes, it was a great feather in our cap to have the Star Wars, stuff, but we didn't make tons of money because the license was so expensive and the amount of money that they took off sales was pretty high percentage. So, so there you have that, I mean, it's like, but it was cool that they had it. And that's part of what made them cool, was like, they had a lot of nice properties. They tried to do Comics Greatest World. I tried to jump in and help. I brought Mark Bright in, I brought Larry Stroman in, we tried to launch some books, and just like everybody was doing, trying to do the same thing. All those companies, were launching, and everybody's going to make $1 million, on comics in the 90s. But it didn't happen. But that was okay. They moved on from that, and they had always had a strong manga presence. One of the earliest ones. I think they had really good translators, and they had good relationships with people in Japan, and and of course they had Mike Mignola and Hellboy, and I knew Mike when I first started working on Doctor Strange with Chris and Alien. I took a trip there, and he was there at the time, so I remember meeting him in the offices, and it was Mark Badger and Chris had an apartment, and so I got to stay with them I'd stay a couple of weeks and just go in and and that's how we got. Actually, I got it wrong. We were still working on Alien Legion when I stayed on that trip. I went into the office and Carl goes, "There's 2 books up, Chris, and you and Randy." He goes, "What do you want to do?" I got Strike Force Morituri over here, and I got Doctor Strange over here. And we're like, Doctor Strange? It's like, yeah, that's one of our childhood books. It's like, so yeah. I mean, neat things happen. But I remember meeting Mike, and then he ended up living here in Oregon, in Portland, for over 9 years, I think. Got married, and then he finally moved back because of family. He's got a kid and everything. I don't know how many kids he's got, but Mike was great. He's always been super nice to me, and he had a great relationship with Dark Horse. And the movies did well, the books did well, everything Mike touches seems to do well. I mean, it's like he was doing that, what was it, Atlantis thing for Disney at one time. He was the complete art director. They liked his style so much, they flew him down from Portland every week to check stuff on the animation when they were doing that animated film. It's just unbelievable. It's like the guy, he's got magic. And, I mean, there's a lot of cool people that, I mean, obviously the Frank Miller stuff was there, the Sin City stuff and all that. So they did their share of really harvesting a lot of creator owned stuff, so it's cool. I mean, if I was going to do a book, that's how I'd do it, I guess.
Yeah, 100%.
Hellboy is one of my all-time favorites.
Oh, yeah.
It's so much fun. Like, it doesn't take itself too seriously, right. Even though like the stories are fairly serious. But I mean, like, they're fun. Yeah, it's just so much fun. But,
well, I think they're open to a lot of stuff. I mean, they got a lot of bizarre stuff too.
Yeah,
they're all over. I mean, what did they have? They did the what's that? The TV series on Netflix that was about those gifted children that were going to save the world or something.
Oh, the Umbrella Academy.
Yeah, that was a comic book years before, and I knew the guy that was doing it, and it was like, what? Is this becoming a TV series now? It's like, really? And I guess they've got Stranger Things, and I don't know. They get a bunch of stuff.
Oh,
So
that little show, that little startup show that they have going on.
They're always working on something. And Mike's bunch of lawyers and his attorney, you know, he's got attorneys and he's got those people. They're always out looking for something. So it's like, you know, they won awards for like, you know, lunch boxes. Like it could be like, you know, Archie lunchbox, or it could be other characters with a license. And it's like, what? But there's money out there and they're going to find. They even did gaming for a little while and that didn't work out. And they had coloring in-house, and then they found they could do it cheaper by sending it out. But they tried at one time. I know they had well over 100 employees, which is pretty good. And they bought up most of downtown Milwaukee, which was in big trouble. You know, it was kind of like, eh. And so it's just like, I grew up going there. And it's like, wow, the drugstore is gone. That's now the headquarters of Dark Arts Comics, you know. And then across the street, you know, you go, oh, well, that's the warehouse. Oh, that used to be, you know, this men's clothing store or whatever. And then the bank is gone. And there's the Predator in the window, you know. It's like, so yeah, they own pretty much that street. You know, it's pretty cool. So it's fun to go visit. You know, I haven't been there for a while.
So to shift a little bit, you're teaching art now. And
you know, well,
how does that feel? Like that must, and you know, you mentioned your, you know, being a teacher runs in your family, runs in Oren's family. And I know he feels pretty rewarded about it. It runs in my family as well, although I have not done so. What's that like for you, making that switch?
Well, you know, it was out of necessity mostly. I mean, it's great to, in retrospect, to go, wow, we had a really good run teaching after I had a really good run in comics. And it was necessity at first. It was because comics weren't panning out. I just like, you know, I was getting jobs and stuff, but I didn't have any more monthlies that you know, and a lot of the stuff that was coming to me was horrible. And I was like, I'm not going to just hack this stuff out. I don't want to be one of those guys that ends up, you know, they slide the papers under the door, have them done by tomorrow morning, you know, the Vinnie Coletta stories. But no, and it was just too difficult. Even with Marvel, I was kind of like, you know, there was an episode where I did an issue of Avengers, and it was over Ivan, and it's like, I'm going to do the best that I can do, but the issue was already a couple of weeks late, and I don't think it was his fault. So you know, they ended up pulling the last 5 pages and just giving to some guy in the office to hack it out. It was like, okay, that's it, I'm done. I don't need to do this anymore. So you know, I moved on, and I figured out that I could do there's a thing called young audiences, and it's probably throughout the United States, but they had it of Southwest Washington and Oregon. And you have to go in and say, you know, I can do an assembly program, and you come up with your plan and basically show them what you're going to do. And you do a performance, and they go, and then they criticize you, and they go, you need to do this, and, you know, anyway, you sign up with them basically if they want you. And I said, you know, I think it'd be really a good thing to be able to do this for kids and to draw for them, talk about the process. I had original art pages I could show on tables. We talked about, you know, continuity, and then I would do a little thing overheads, you know, a lot of projections with storytelling, where it was like, you know, it was a very simple story. I would tell them, and then I would have options of pictures to go through and talk about, you know, all of the stuff I learned from my editors, you know, what direction the character needs to be going, and how to establish a background, and what's going, you zoom in on a close-up to get to know your character, then you start out wide in a wide shot to show where you are in an establishing shot. It's just like a movie. Anyway, I did all of that stuff, put it together, and then I drew for them too. I would draw Spider-Man or whatever, and everybody loves that, you know. And so that started as just a show, as like a live show of doing assembly programs, and they would book them, and I booked some myself. It seems like I got in trouble every time I did some of the booking. You know, it's like they took a good share of it. So I realized that at some point I'm going to break away from these guys because I don't need them. You know, and eventually, yeah, we came to a not good end. It was kind of like, well, we're not upping your contract. It's like, well, I wasn't going to do it anyway because you don't own me. You know, it's like, this is my show, not yours. So it went from that to like a few blocks from here, there was a new little shopping area, and in that there was a comic book, well, not comic book, there was no comic book store, it was an art store where they sold things for art supplies and they did stuff for parties. I mean, it was kind of a weird combination of, you know, art store. So I said, well, you want somebody to teach some classes? And, you know, somebody had suggested that, and they said, well, okay, yeah. Of course, they took a chunk of that too, but it was a good place for me to sharpen my skills and come up with some curriculum. And my wife is a teacher. She was teaching elementary school all this time. And so she was helping me with stuff. And it's like, okay. So I had to come up with a lot of sheets of what I call deconstruction. You know, it's like somebody says, oh, we want to do Super Mario, or a gaming character, or somebody off TV that I've never heard of, or whatever. And so I go research, and I take the character, and I'm an animator. So I understand how to construct characters of all kinds. So then I would deconstruct the character and break it down into 3 parts and show, you know, circles to this, and we'd go through and I would draw with the kids step by step. So that ended up being something I did there. Then the shop closed. And one of the ladies goes, well, you could do this in the schools, you know, you just have to apply and get approved. And so I ended up in a bunch of elementary schools doing after school enrichment programs. And we did animation and comic book character arts. There's a lot of cartooning. And man, I got closets in the garage of like stacks of, you know, these worksheets of, you know, all of the characters that I had to deconstruct and come up with ways of drawing. And I did. And then okay, early on, this is my wife's idea, not mine. Best idea ever. She goes, why don't we do an art camp, a summer art camp? Because those people are making a fortune doing those sports camps, you know. We know one teacher that was doing it. He's making 6 figures on his sports camps, and then he makes his paltry teaching salary, you know, during the year. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, this, and somebody told me, they go, you'll find out in a hurry if it has, you know, saleability. I mean, if there's a need for it, you know, if somebody, and sure enough, it's like, you know, we started out with just doing a week, and we did it in a school where Judy did a lot of teaching. And the principal was nice. He signed us off, and we did that camp, and it was fun. And, you know, we made, I don't know, it wasn't a lot of money. It was a few $1,000. And we thought, well, we can do this. And so we, you know, did it again the next year. And then the next year we added a week, and we went to 2 different schools, and just split them up. So we had one in one district and one in another. One was in Portland. It's kind of up in the hills, but it was such a great facility. And then the one was in Beaverton. And then I started having trouble with Beaverton as far as being able to book it early enough. So we just went with the one in the Portland one, and people came from all over. And it went for 13 years. And even my other teaching in schools went for almost 13 years. I cut it back slowly as I was approaching, you know, where I wanted to do retirement. But, and then COVID shut it all down. We were actually going to do it in 2020. You know, 2019 was our last camp, but we did 13 years of those camps, and we got, you know, Dark Horse was our sponsor at the beginning. Not really a sponsor, but they gave us tons of stuff. Everybody had Dark Horse lanyards with like Comic-Con. They had their name on it. They have their folders. They get all these posters and, you know, all kinds of swag. And then there were comics. Awesome. And I went to a comic book store, a huge comic book store. I like comics. And he would just go, you know, take 2 long boxes and fill them up with DC and Marvels. And, you know, it's like, and I picked, you know, stuff that was in really good condition and newer stuff. And we had tables where it was like your name was drawn every day. You know, you didn't know if it was going to be early or late, but you got to go to the table and choose a couple of items and a lot of my posters and stuff. And at the end of the day, I'm signing stuff, and there's comics, and the kids are walking out of there with like bags full of stuff every day, you know. And then we got Archie to join, and then DC, when they came on, they were the best. They were so easy to work with. And literally when the FedEx truck pulled up the first time and the guy had to, you know, use the, you know, the elevator, you know, like the lift to get it down and then get it up the driveway. It was like 36 boxes on this pallet. It's like, I don't think we need that many, you know, but we distributed them at other Comic Cons and stuff. But we won awards for that camp, and there were waiting lists every year, and we charged more and more and more and more. Finally, you could make like in 3 weeks, we were doing it 3 weeks, and I dropped going to San Diego Con. I was just like, in 2012 was the 50th anniversary. I thought, that's it. I've done 20 years at San Diego Con. I'm done, you know. And it's like, and I'd rather do the camps because that way we don't have to break them up. We have 3 full weeks in one location, and it was amazing. I mean, you know, in the end, I'm glad that we were forced to quit, because Judy and I would have tried again. We tried to outdo ourselves, and it starts, you know, like in January, and then the camps are in July, the first 3 weeks of July, after 4th of July. And it just kills you. I mean, it's like you're putting together all the art supplies and you're contacting, the companies, and you're getting stuff, and you got to get, I mean, all of the registrations and online people paying their $100, and then they want to shift classes. And I mean, it's like, it's a huge deal. Yeah. And we did it. And we made really good money that helped, basically fill the hole that comics had left. And we were fine. And we just thought, let's do it another year. And then COVID came, and there was no way we could do it. I mean, if somebody gets sick, you're quarantined, and that's got to refund everybody's money. And it's like, as it was, we were going to do it in 2020. And I took a bunch of, I got the space, and I had it already booked because I figured the pandemic's going to be over by, next summer. No, and so I had to refund everybody's money. And there were already like 100 people had, put in $100. So it was like I PayPal refunded everybody's stuff, and everybody just keeps emailing me going, are you going to do them again? And it's like, no, we're retired. And it's great. I mean, it's like, I feel like we went out on a high note. Nobody will probably ever do anything like that. I mean, maybe it's, somebody said to me, they go, that may be the thing that you're remembered for. It's like, I didn't franchise it, but it was so unique. I mean, it's like we did characters every morning and afternoon, and they were from all genres. So I made sure that we did a manga, we did a superhero, we did, like a cartoon animation character, we did a newspaper strip character, and so we mixed all of these up. But we always, each day, had a focus on, this was a Dark Horse day, this is a Marvel day, this is a DC day, this is an Archie day. And the other brilliant thing was we only did 4 days, and we gave ourselves 3 days to recover. So no class on Friday for us. And a lot of parents are going on vacation, they're going camping and stuff, or, sports, they'd take their kid out anyway. So it's like, don't do Friday, let's just do Monday through Thursday. And it was tough, because we did sound effects posters, and then a cover, which has all the elements of a cover, full size, 11 by 17. I mean, it's like this big, it's like that big, and kids aren't used to drawing that much. And then at the end, for those that were more advanced, and almost everybody got to try doing a 1-page strip, and actually my thought, and it was probably the smart thing to do, was to do 7 plots. I mean, one was like a paragraph, so that if kids had to think of their own story and draw it, we'd be there like all year, it's like take forever, so they got to choose from the very simple to the most complex. And it was all science fiction, manga, horror, mystery, superhero. And it was great. I mean, we got some really great pieces, great product out of it. So anyway, big success, and now it's over. And now I like just last, 2 days ago, I was in the wilderness, and we were there for like a week, kayaking and camping and up in the mountains at 6,000 feet. So
wow,
it's fun. And now I'm going to Terrific Con on Thursday, so I'll be there for 5 days, with everybody. I looked at the list, and it's like everybody is there.
I will be there.
Oren will be there.
I'm looking for
all right, man. Yeah, Carl Potts is gonna be there.
Yeah.
It's the 60th anniversary of Spider-Man, so all these Spider-Man artists are there. Everybody's there.
Sadly, I can't go, but
well, you should be ashamed of yourself.
I should, but one of my family members has a graduation party, so.
All right.
Sorry.
So where can fans find you now? See your work, contact you, keep up with what you're doing?
Mostly I'm, Facebook's okay. I mean, but they're connected. Instagram is where I am. It's at Randy Emberlin. And I post stuff from shows, and I'll post, like sketches, those blank cover sketches, or if I'm doing a commission or a color piece or something, anyway, you can just go back and look at all my stuff on Instagram, and you'll see a bunch of stuff. And you can DM me. And then my website, which is just my name, Randy Emberlin, it's old and it's kind of defunct, it's got funky, but it's got stuff on it. And the thing is, you can get my email, and you can email me there. And, so it's a vehicle. I don't keep it up that well, other than the fact that they need it for like doing Comic Cons. They go, you need an HTTP, you need like a place where we can go see that you have artwork on. So anyway, but yeah, Instagram is probably pretty much it. It's like for now. And it works. It seems to work. That way I can put up recent stuff, and, and I'm not doing any comic book, projects like doing it. I'm going to do the Great American Novel as a comic book now. It's like some of my friends are doing that. I mean, like what's his face, Ron Reynolds doing Trekker, and he's so happy to be doing it, and he's doing it all with Kickstarters, like so many people are, right? Because it really doesn't pay to work for the big companies anymore. I mean, they can't afford to pay you. I mean, what we were making back then, there's nobody making that money now in comics. It's a joke. I mean, it's like they want to pay you like, you know, the same starting rate as back then. Now, you know, it's like, right. What?
Thank you.
And the guys that do get paid that much, they don't deliver on what they're supposedly
I
doing.
know. It's just not the same. So I applaud all those people that are doing their Patreon projects and their Kickstarters, and they want to produce, you know, comics still. At my age, I just don't have that kind of energy. And I'm a musician, so I would rather be playing jazz guitar, working out arrangements. To me, music is kind of like the final frontier. I like the fact that it's in the moment, as opposed to comics. You sweat and you work and you slave, and then you hold it back and look at it and you admire what you've done. You know, you go, I did it, or that looks good. You know, it's a total different experience. So, I mean, you know, I would rather be doing music actually, but I still like drawing. Obviously, it's fun to do. Keep my hand in. Because I mean, I did the teaching and I did the drawing, and I did animation for 10 years. I did over 50 commercials. So I know how to do animation. And it was the old style. It was like cell animation. You know, back in those days, we had to photograph it on an Oxbury animation stand, even though we had a Lion and Lamb video animator to do our pencil tests with. But that was a great experience too. I get to meet 3 or 4 of, I think 4 of the 9 old men, the original animators at Disney. Yeah, Mark Davis came to Portland State, the guy who always had the, you know, the cigarette holder type thing, you know, is the character. And let's see, the 2 guys that, you know, Ollie Johnson and Frank Thomas, they were actually responsible for us getting one of those, it's like a process camera, but it's for cells. And so you actually, you know, the powder, you know, the toner goes onto this acetate, and then you have to stick it into a box that has ammonia to actually bond it.
It's safe.
So old. Yeah, I mean, we had one of those, but the camera was really cool. And they were friends of, you know, one of the guys in the studio. And so, you know, I can't remember who the other guy was, but I met 4 of them, you know, before I think they're all passed away now, but it was kind of cool. Because that's another incredible generation, a whole industry of just so cool. I mean, I was always into, you know, animation, photography, and drawing and music. Those are the 4 things that turned me on. And I could never find college that could produce that, you know, and back in those days. Yeah. I mean, it's like always like, well, we have a lot of fine art, painting and drawing here. It's like, yeah, I did that for a year up at Whitworth College. And it was like, okay, I'm not going anywhere with this. I'm going back to study film, you know, in Portland at the Film Study Center and at Portland State. Then I studied music. I just put the artwork away. I thought, I'm not going to get into comics. I'm just going to, you know, study music here. I'm into jazz. And then it was like, the thing with Chris happened, and actually we started doing animation, so that was kind of cool, because animation is really, it's drawing and music and photography. I mean, it's 3 things, you know. It's really cool.
That's awesome.
So yeah, it's another good thing. We could talk about that forever too.
I was gonna say, we'd love to have you back on to talk about all sorts of that stuff.
Yeah.
All right, well, this has been great.
Thank you so much for your time, because you've been extremely interesting. And yeah, I, like Oren said, I would definitely love, you know, if, you know, schedules allow for it, I'd love to have you back on, and I would love to dig more into your animation background.
Yeah, there's a history there too. Yeah, it was fun. You know, it's cool because I was very fortunate to be involved in the beginning of Dark Horse too. And there's a lot more stories that go along with Dark Horse, because I'm, you know, my dad was a principal in Milwaukee School District, and that's where they are. And I grew up in Happy Valley and went to a Milwaukee school. So I knew Milwaukee, and I knew, you know, where I knew all that stuff. Now we live on the west side, so it's a ways in. So when I was working on all that Star Wars stuff, I had to drive, you know, a ways to get it. It took me a half hour to get there, and so I don't go there as often now. But you know, they know me pretty well, although a lot of faces have changed these days. But yeah, so yeah, there's a lot of cool stories about Dark Horse, that's for sure. And you know, who gets to be involved in the beginning of a company and then work for Marvel too, and get to teach and do animation? It's like, I got to do a bunch of cool stuff. You know, I'm really thankful.
100%.
That's awesome.
Really impressed.
And we're back. Look, I really enjoyed our time talking to Randy. I appreciated hearing his method on inking comics, you know, laying one paper over the other and you know, laying out the ink. But I appreciate his view on comics today and kind of how some characters are a little overdone. So, you know, hearing that from comic book creators and contributors, I really appreciate those opinions.
And I think it was so cool to see that unused cover with Carnage that did not make it to press, but to see what it could have been. I think both work very well, but it's always really cool to see the behind the scenes of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, great interview, guys. Thanks for doing it. Thanks, Randy, for being on the show. Thank you, listeners and viewers, for checking us out. We are the Dollar Bin Bandits. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. It helps us grow, and that'll do it. So we will see you next time. Peace.